the thing that drew me, and I think it draws most readers about Locked Room, is it's an impossible murder. That is always what it is. It's like that murder could not have been committed. And there's nothing more thrilling, I think, if you're going to do crime. This is the Everest of crime, right? Writing one of these things. Like, you've got to write an impossible. It could not have been committed. Nobody could have done it. How do you plot it? How do you solve it? Who could possibly solve that mystery? And I think what happened was Agatha Christie did so many of these, and she sort of created the tropes that we think of as being part of the Locked Room mystery, that it's almost made it common. It's almost made it feel like this not special thing. And it's exceptionally special. And every crime author I know at some point has tried to plot one of these or has just written one out. It feels like a rite of passage almost to write the impossible murder, to write the Locked Room. And bear in mind, like, Locked Room is a very broad. It can be a locked house. It can be, in my case, a locked boat. It can be a locked island. Just locking things down and making the thing impossible in some way is the key draw.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 106 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me as always, my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, my dear MJ Kuhn. How are you, MJ?
I am lovely. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Just gonna grab your books because I gotta promote my girl's work because she's the best and Thorne's a hungry boy. Go pick up Among Thieves, which is her debut novel, The Blue Baby, book 1 in the Tales of Timor duology, and Thick Ass Thieves, book 2, The Green Baby. If you want yourselves a hefty helping of hatchets and fights and swearing, there's so much swearing in this book. You're gonna love it.
I like the alliteration, and the promotion of the swearing is important. Yes, thank you.
I haven't said that I haven't talked about the swearing in your books for quite a while. I think it's in book 2.
Yeah, it's literally
what is it? The dedication. I will read it to all of you fine folks. For my wonderfully supportive parents, sorry for all the swearing in here. So there you go.
It was necessary.
It was so necessary, dude.
You can also pick up Adrian's Blue Baby, Mushroom Blues, baby.
Yeah.
Or a noir, crime novel filled with mushrooms. Good shit.
Yeah, and there's swearing in there too.
There's swearing in there too. And there will probably be swearing in this episode. Let's go.
Of course there will. Well, with our guest today, there definitely will be. As well, a quick note for everyone out there listening or watching, the official SFF Addicts Patreon and merch store are live, so check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now, joining us once again is the wonderful Stuart Turton, author of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, Devil in the Dark Water, and the newly released, at least in North America, because it's been out in the UK for months now, because they're special, The Last Murder at the End of the World. Welcome back, Stu. How are you?
Hiya, pals. I'm very happy to be back. It's lovely to see your smiley, happy, shiny faces.
Aww, fucking perky pair.
It's rubbing off on me. I came into this dour and miserable, and then you two you've just cheered me right up. I'm floating on clouds.
Perfect.
The antithesis to your dour Britishness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brought some Ecuadorian sunshine to your life.
Exactly.
You have.
Exactly.
I also did a load of drugs before we came in, but I doubt that's got anything to do with it, so it won't be that.
He read Mushroom Blues and he licked the ink on the pages.
Yeah, there you go. Little Simon.
A heads up, this is part 2 of our 2-part chat with Stu, so I recommend checking out part 1 to get to know him better. Today, though, I hope you've been practicing your escape room skills because we're going to be talking about locked room mysteries, which I'm very, very excited about. Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. 4 titans sleep beneath the earth. Only one fae can keep them from waking. Silbury is an orphaned wood nymph, taken from her forest home and raised in the corrupt city of Pendurin. The Fey child grows up unaware of who she is, what she can do, and the calling of her kind. Under the control of a cruel guildmaster, Silbury is trained as an assassin. As an adult, she escapes her violent past to start a new life and a family. But a tragic death brings her back to the familiar cobbled streets to seek revenge. This dark path leads Silbury to uncover an even darker secret. An ancient evil will wake the Titans and break the world. Silbury must travel with her daughter across a war-torn land to defeat that evil. What begins as a fairy tale transforms into a sweeping, multi-generational epic about love and loss, and a woman with a strange connection to nature. The Dryad's Crown by David Hopkins is a powerful and emotional debut fantasy novel. The Dryad's Crown is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Visit dryadscrown.com to purchase the book from your favorite online retailer. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. So first, let's dive into this by talking about locked room mysteries in general. What do you think it is about locked room mysteries that draws readers to this particular subgenre? And what was the first locked room mystery you remember engaging with? You mentioned Agatha Christie last episode, but we can dig into it a little bit more.
Yeah, so the thing that drew me, and I think it draws most readers about locked room, is it's an impossible murder. That is always what it is. It's like that murder could not have been committed, and there's nothing more thrilling, I think, if you're going to do crime. This is the Everest of crime, right? Writing one of these things. Like, you've got to write an impossible. It could not have been committed. Nobody could have done it. How do you plot it? How do you solve it? Who could possibly solve that mystery? And I think what happened was Agatha Christie did so many of these, and she sort of created the tropes that we think of as being part of the locked room mystery, that it's almost made it common. It's almost made it feel like this not special thing, and it's exceptionally special. And every crime author I know at some point has tried to plot one of these or has just written one out. It feels like a rite of passage almost to write the impossible murder, to write the locked room. And bear in mind, like, locked room is a very broad. It can be a locked house. It can be, in my case, a locked boat. It can be a locked island. Just locking things down and making the thing impossible in some way is the key draw. Did that answer all of your question? I may have forgotten what the first part was now.
But what was the particular locked room mystery that kind of drew you in first?
Oh, it's the Agatha Christie and Then There Were None. I always remember that. Have you guys read that novel? It's so good. And my pet theory about this, because I am a structure geek in novels, I love structure. And if you want to sort of blend genres, and I'm sure you talked about this in one of your previous podcasts, you have to have an intricate surgical knowledge of the genres that you're trying to blend, because you have to understand which tropes you require and which tropes can be thrown away. Like, which of say there's 25 tropes in a novel, which 4 of them can you keep and it still feel like the novel that you're trying to rape or trying to use? So I love structure. And when I'm moving into something else, whether that's horror, whether that's fantasy, if that's a romance book, I'll read a bunch of them and dissect them. I will just take them apart page by page, like literally take them apart, pull out paragraphs and work out how they're structured, work out what the tropes are, what are the things that everybody always has. So doing that with crime, I did that with And Then There Were None. And do you know what genre it most closely replicates?
No,
Slasher movies. Slasher
Really?
movies. So if you marry them up, the tropes are identical to slasher movies. Right. So basically it's picked off one by...
The pacing as well.
Exactly. Archetypes that are just sort of very thinly drawn, characters who you don't care about too much, because the point of it is that they're going to get killed off. So the point of these people is to die. The point is not to solve it. The point is not to be witnesses. The point is to be victims. It's very rare that a genre does that, where a genre says all of these people are expendable. Even crime doesn't do it. Because in crime, if you start killing off your characters, what you're doing is you're killing off witnesses and you're killing off suspects. And if you kill off too many suspects, then it's obvious who the murderer is. So you can't do it. Whereas she, from the beginning of that novel, is killing off the characters one by one, and she's going to kill them all off. So they're transformed into something else. They're transformed into victims. it's a slasher movie writ large. That's what it is. And I'm completely convinced that she is the proto slasher writer, that she's the first one who ever did it.
That is like the first time I've ever, in my mind, it's like Agatha Christie and like Nightmare on Elm Street. And I'm just like, my mind is exploding.
Right? It's one of those things that like once it's pointed out, it's like, I can't remember which guest it was, but the first person on the show to point out that Jurassic Park is in fact science fiction. I was like, well, fucking of course it is. But like, it's just, you don't think of it because it's so huge.
It's so mainstream that people just kind of associate it. It's like, oh, this is a thriller.
And then there were none is slasher. Oh my gosh, I love that.
It's the proto slasher.
It's the proto slasher. So that's what got me into them, because it really was an impossible problem. And I remember reading all the way through that, being like, somebody's killing these people and that person can't be on the island. So what? Like, and it just killed my brain trying to figure it out. And I stopped that book because I was so into it and I was so fascinated by it. And I was so fascinated by the way she was writing it. And bear in mind, I'm only 9. I'm only 10 at this point. Like, it really got deep into me. And I stopped for about 2 weeks and was writing things down, trying to figure this out and bothering my mum and dad, being like, hey, she's doing this thing. And my parents don't read, so they have no idea what I'm talking about and have no interest in it whatsoever. And it obsessed me. It truly did. So I think that's where it started. I think that's the one that I loved the most.
Wow. Okay. I want to go back and read this. I haven't read it in years.
I know. I was going to say, it's been a very long time. I think I was in like high school the last time I read it. I need to revisit. But
it's definitely worth a read.
Yeah. When you're mentioning this kind of like really satisfying way that this subgenre of the locked room mystery kind of scratches the brain really well, I'm curious, what else does this offer you as a writer? What kind of fun things are you able to explore, able to look into, able to kind of include in your work that the locked room element really lets you explore and dial in on?
The big thing it gives you is that there is no fucking earthly reason to kill someone in a locked room fashion. None whatsoever. Never. Never in the whole history of mankind has anybody ever been murdered in an impossible locked room scenario. It's never happened. Because if you want to kill a human being, you either shoot them, stab them, poison them, or hit them with a brick. That's basically, you've got plenty of options. They're all much simpler. You don't need to go to any elaborate lengths to do it. You just don't. So, if you want to write one, you've got to find some reason why it would have been done in this setting. Why would anybody go to all this fucking trouble to do it this way, right? And lots of mystery writers, and I'm not going to call anybody out, but lots of mystery writers don't bother with that bit. They have the locked room, and when you get to the end of the book, it sounds satisfying. Like, you could understand, how it was done. But if you really itch it and you're like, why did they bother doing that? Like, why did they bother going to all that effort? There is no reason for it. It would have been just as easy for them to hide their identity one of 10 other different ways, usually included in the same book. So that's really fascinating. So I'm always really bothered by that. I'm really bothered about why does this happen? Like, why does somebody have to be killed in this fashion? And that always leads me to a quite elevated mystery, because there is no reason to do it. So you've got to suddenly elevate the stakes. You've got to elevate the world a little bit. You've got to elevate the position of the person who's been murdered a little bit. You have to include all these other elements to explain why it had to happen this way. And what that can sometimes end up with, if you're not very careful, is there's an Agatha Christie, which is, I can't remember the actual name of it, but it's called, I think it's like the Christmas Day Murders or the Christmas Murder or something like that. And that's a locked room murder with the most ludicrous solution for how it was done. So spoilers, just tune me out for the next minute. But basically, the solution to that problem is almost the guy was on a chair and there was a balloon under a leg of the chair, which somebody popped using a big long stick with a sharp thing on it. And then they fell and they hung, and then someone else in the house had to scream at exactly the same time. It's insane. Like, it is as insane as killing somebody by them chasing a butcher's dog down the road with sausages in its mouth and they trip and get hit by a grand piano. It's bonkers. It doesn't work. It's daft. But you see how easily you can be led to it. You see how easily, because you've set yourself this impossible writing challenge of the locked room, how easy it is to get really big and really daft to try and sort of just make it work in the first place. So that's the double-pronged thing that can go wrong, right? It can be like, there's no reason for this to have happened, and it's the way I've sort of explained it is daft. But if you get it right, the thing it gives you is a really satisfying end of book moment when they're like, should have seen it. There was only one way to have done it. There was only one reason why this could have happened. And as a writer, to plot that and get there is the most gratifying high. It genuinely is. As a piece of plotting, to make that work and to have that day when you don't have it, you don't have it, you don't have it, and then you're in the supermarket and you've got an orange in your hand and you're like, I fucking got it. I fucking got it. I know how to do this. And you run out with the orange in your hand that you've not paid for, and then you're chased by the police and it all goes very badly. But you have it, and it's the only thing that sort of like, and I don't know about you guys, but when I plot, I am so filled, my head is filled with plotting. Like I am not present for any other conversation. I'm not present in the pub. I'm not present in my home. I'm not present with my children, because my entire brain is clenched around this one activity, trying to do it. And you can't stop. You can't give it up. It's just an impossible. So there's such a sweet relief when you plot that locked room and when you get the reasoning and you understand how it was done and why it was done that way. It is so, then you're like, oh my God, like this is, I can't wait to do this. And then, as we discussed in the previous podcast, I actually sit down at the computer and I'm like, oh no, I could have waited to do this.
Like, oh wait, I forgot.
I could have waited. I forgot. I hate this so much. Yeah. I was so taken by my stolen orange that I forgot that I didn't want to be here.
And then you're never allowed back in Aldi ever again.
Right.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. But Aldi North is fine.
Aldi South. Yeah, Aldi North is fine.
Yeah,
I love all these in-jokes that people... Yeah, these people have no idea what we're talking about.
If you listen to the end of last episode, you'll understand. Yeah. I love that, though. Yeah, like that. Finding that gratification is so amazing. And you brought up earlier that when you're blending genres, it's not that you have to include every single trope. It's like you find the things that work for this particular story, and especially if you're blending genres, you find the things in each of those genres. But for you, from your perspective, what are some of the key elements of a locked room mystery? And then touching on what we mentioned previously, like how might one approach picking and choosing the elements that will best serve their stories while tossing the others aside?
It's interesting because I think when I was doing my research, and this is the research into how you write one of these things, this is the research into dissecting previous locked room mysteries and reading across, because locked room mysteries exist in lots of genres. They exist in sci-fi, they exist in crime, they exist in, it's an element that is present in a lot of different things. It's not present in television, which is interesting, or movies a lot. It's not often done. It's not often used as a thing. And I think it's quite hard to explain in that format. I think the crucial thing is the sense that when you get to the reveal, the clues were there. And you could say that about crime, but I think a lot of crime sort of gets away with the idea that the investigators go from here and they get a thing, and then that leads them to the next thing, and then that leads them to the next thing, and you can plot and that works as a crime book. I think in a locked room mystery, the expectation is that the reader should have been able to solve it for themselves, because it's a very sort of like tiny set of circumstances and objects in play and suspects, right? Usually a locked room is there were 10 people in the house. These were the things we found in the locked room. So when we finally did break down the door, these were the things in the room. So the murder has to have used those things. So you have to give the reader those things when you're writing it. You have to say in the first 10 pages, first 20 pages, here are the things that were in the room. And from that, I think, comes an expectation that they should be able to work it out from those things and from the clues that you subsequently reveal. I think that's fair. I think that works for the genre. And I think if you don't do that, weirdly, even if you have a locked room, it's not a locked room mystery. I don't think it feels quite fair. Because again, this is not where you have a normal murder and you don't even know what the murder weapon is, and then the police have to go and find the murder weapon. This is not that. You should have everything you need to solve the mystery straight away. And then as you gather up, what you're getting is motivations. So the way that the crime was committed should be solvable from all the things that were in the room. and then you get motivation for the murder, and you get time frame you get motivation and you get time frame from the interview process, and from all that sort of good stuff. I think that's what's necessary. As for genre, what you pick and what you throw away, this took me ages to work out. Like, I genuinely,
It's so difficult, isn't it?
it's really rough. And the way I've started to visualize this is that you've got to pick the genre that you're operating in first. So for me, I write crime books. So 70% of the tropes that I obey are crime, right? There will be crime tropes. So you will have things like red herrings. You will have the locked room. You will have the furnace of the locked room mystery. You will have a limited set of suspects to sort of choose from. And then it will never be like a twin. It will never be those sorts of rules of things. It'll never be too ridiculous. It should be something.
The Prestige, because that was done quite well.
Unless it's the Prestige, and then you can have sort of tanks full of copies of yourself for some fucking reason. But so I think of it almost like the main genre that you've got is a Christmas tree. That's your Christmas tree, right? And then the rest of the genres are the baubles that go on it. You only need 2 or 3 of them. Like, you can have, so when I did Devil, there's actually a romance in there. There's a little like romance that runs through the middle of that book between the 2 characters. And when I started reading romances for that, what I realized was actually I only needed 3 things to make my romance work. I needed the mutual respect, which my 2 characters didn't have from the other people in their life. So they would find that respect, and that respect would be attractive to each other. You needed that. You needed the setback. So you needed the sort of meet cute, and then the reason the meet cute worked. Then you needed the setback, and then the thing that's pushed their relationship back a step or 2. Then, of course, you needed we both need each other to solve this mystery, and the recognition of that. It's only 3 things from an entire genre of books. And once I had those 3 things, I understood how to make that through line work. If I tried to take all the other bits of romance and load it on, the book A would have been 260,000 words. B wouldn't have been a crime book anymore. And it's really important that you know what book you're writing. Like, you can cross genre. You're not really crossing genre. You're writing one type of book that has ornamentation from other books. That's often the way it works. And if you build your world well enough, and if you build your characters well enough, and you have the very few tropes that you need, it will feel like you've piled that entire genre into your book, even though it's a bit of an illusion. It's just a scarf. It's just a few baubles on your Christmas tree. So for this one, this Last Murder, I think, is the book that maybe feels most like the thing that it's not. Like, I think this feels very sci-fi. I think that it feels like it's got a lot of sci-fi elements in it, and it's not. It's it may be, even at this point, the most traditional crime book I've ever written, in terms of but because it has an investigator who's not a traditional investigator, because it's set in this really unusual utopian dystopian, an island surrounded by a barrier, surrounded by a fog that wants to kill everyone. It feels like a huge sci-fi thing, but that's just a setting. That's just like 3 bits of a setting. That's all it is. So I don't think that necessarily answers the question, but I think you've got to understand the genres you're working in. You've got to dissect them, and then you've got to be able to pull out the few things that work for your book.
Yeah. And I what you brought up about Last Murder, it's like the ways in which your setting can we talked with Robert Jackson Bennett about this, but basically, like, the ways in which your world building in your setting can evoke something larger than what is actually on the page. And I think that's the beauty of the imagination. It's like each reader is going to take something away from the particular story, but also their imagination is going to work with the story in order to create a grander whole than what you've actually created as a writer. And we touched on setting a little bit last episode, and I think that's something that's really interesting in the case of locked room. It doesn't have to be locked room, like you said. It could be locked space, just a space in general that confines the characters. But when you have that small chessboard for your pieces to play on, it's all the more important to kind of keep your setting atmospheric and sort of like engaging for the reader, such that the playground for your characters feels fresh. And so how do you maintain that throughout the entirety of a contained setting and a contained story? And what's your advice for keeping the stakes high, even though you have like MJ put it as like a small floor plan
Yeah.
if you want to get architectural about it.
I think every book, there's no quote about this, but like a book is just a long corridor with painted on doors. Like you'd always go into one place, but it should feel like at any point you could go to all these other places. It should feel like this is a wide, expansive thing with lots of options, and there isn't, because I am taking you to a very specific place. So when I'm world building, that's always what I'm doing. I'm feeding in little nuggets into dialogue, into the world that hint at another story somewhere. It also helps that I don't like red herrings as a writer. I think they're a very authorial trick, and I think they feel very artificial. It feels like the author has come into the novel to try and deceive you, right? What I prefer to do, and what I always try to do with my books, is set up 6 or 7 other mysteries that are running through, and those are usually the motivations of all the witnesses. And the idea is always that our investigator is not getting bogged down in red herrings. What they're doing is investigating the wrong mysteries first. They're being led to these other mysteries, which are very important, but probably not in this book. They could be the center of a different book, but they're not the center of this book. But to get to what they need to know, they have to go through other people's mysteries. And it's kind of like a guy sort of charging through hedges. Like it's just one after another, getting waylaid and getting pulled down. But they're never red herrings. They all have worth. They all tell us something about the other characters. They all tell us something about the world that we inhabit, right? Because these things are usually about. So to give an example of this, I can't talk about Last Murder because obviously a lot of people hopefully have read Seven Deaths. So in Seven Deaths, you've got the character of Stanwin, who is this sort of bully at the start of the novel. He's a monster. And as the novel's revealed and you get into his secrets, you realize that he's a blackmailer. He's blackmailing the family, but he's doing it because he has a daughter who works in the house and he wants to free her from this life, right? Or the entire novel sets him up as the murderer. It sets him up as this incredibly terrible dude. And he's the only one in that novel who has a pure motivation, it turns out. He's also, as the character digs into his story and digs into his backstory, that reveals more about the Hardcastles, it reveals more about the world around him, it reveals more about the rules of the world we operate in. It gives you an entire world through, I honestly think there's maybe 6 or 7 scenes through him. Like, that's all you really get. Like, very limited dialogue, he gets very limited page time. But because he's so involved with the world and he's so webbed into the world. Every time you talk to him, you feel like you're getting loads of the world through him. He's almost like a magnifying glass for it. So I'm always trying to do that with every single character. I've completely forgotten what the rest of the question was now because I talked for so long.
No. Keep it going, man. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about. It's like the ways in which like the character is like, and I think in a locked room mystery, it is almost harder because the perspectives of the characters are so much more confined, and therefore the world obviously feels more closed in. But the way that you approach it in terms of presenting multiple mysteries within a grander mystery is an effective way of being able to provide that scope despite the limited setting. I think is really useful.
I think so as well, because I think what happens often is that when you're writing your characters, you can fall into the trap of writing them so that they only serve the plot that you have, right? That they are like adjuncts to it or growths out of it, and that they only really come alive when...
Or like their life doesn't exist like before and after this thing.
Precisely. And that's every book I do this, I want the world to feel like it was running before you got there and it will carry on when you leave. So my plots are often quite open-ended and you usually get dropped into the action and something's already befallen the characters because I want that sense of like you're dropping in a small slice. So I do the same with characters. Often when you meet them, they'll be arguing about something. They'll be in the midst of an argument. They'll be in the midst of a conversation. That conversation will be cut off because their life is going on. Something's happening to them that you're not privy to. Now, that could be useful later on, or maybe they just don't like you observing them. So it's always about, again, it's the long corridor with the painted doors. It's the idea that there's much more going on here than is actually going on here. And I also want my characters always to feel like they could hold their own book. And it comes across as something that people just say and authors just say, but I really do like the idea that you create a cast of characters who could be the center of their own mysteries and that they have enough internal life and they have enough goals and they have enough cutthroat passions that I could make them the character in something, even a short story, and they would hold your attention for long enough to get you through that story. So often, if I feel like they're not doing that, I will drop out of it and I will drop them, because they shouldn't be just serving the story. They shouldn't just be people who are drifting along in this current. They should feel like they can affect it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and
I
on
agree.
the topic of characters, though, too, while we're talking about the importance, because obviously characters are critical in any story, but I think in the locked room, it's even more critical because they're the focal point of everything. What is your method, or how do you use these characters, their backstories, their personalities, their flaws, to kind of maintain the twists and turns and the intricacy that that is so central to the locked room mystery, right? Like, we are always talking about this breadcrumb trail of hints that needs to be there to be satisfying. Um, where did the characters' personalities and backstory play into that trail of little crumbs?
Very simply, actually,
And the
my idea is
misdirection
that
too.
my idea is always that everything should be a challenge for your protagonist. So nothing should ever be given. So every time they want a bit of information out of a character, they have to earn it, and there has to be a trial of some description. So whether that is a physical trial that they have to overcome, usually more for my books, a mental trial, there will be a bit of information they didn't have before that they can bring back. They have to be smarter than the character. They have to apply the information in the correct way. Or they just have to prove themselves to somebody. So I make every character an obstacle. That's all I do. So they all have their own mysteries, as we discussed. But to get anything out of them about their mysteries, my character has to be smarter than them for a page, for half a page, for a sentence. They have to say the right thing at the right moment. The misdirects should always come from the fact that there is a genuine reason why this character is lying to your protagonist. If at any point a character lies for absolutely no reason whatsoever, you've gone wrong in your plotting and you've gone wrong in your characterization. There's no reason for that to happen unless you've made that character an inveterate liar. And usually we don't do that because there's enough lies and there's enough misdirections in the
It feels a
novel.
bit cheap.
I think it does, and I think it's like if you just make your murderer a sociopath who killed because they're a sociopath. Doesn't. There's no emotional core to that. Usually, you'll get to the end of it and you'll just be like, oh, okay. Well, so they were just like, if the idea is that they've killed 9 people and it's just a countdown, that's fine. But if you're doing a murder mystery and you're doing a locked room murder mystery and your characters killed somebody in that fashion just because they felt like it, every reader's just going to shrug. You're not going to get anything. There needs to be an emotional component to that murder. There always has to be, because otherwise there's no catharsis in it. There's no catharsis in the solving of the puzzle. So the idea about misdirection, the idea about lying, should always come out of their goals. It should always come out of their, why are they lying to that person? Why are they trying to lead them astray? They have usually 9 out of 10 characters in a locked room murder mystery have no dog in the hunt. They don't care whether the detective works out who killed that person in that ridiculous fashion. So why would they lie about it? You have to have a really strong, compelling reason for that. And if you do, generally, and usually in your writing, if I'm writing and they lie, and I know immediately why they've lied, I'm fairly certain I've got a good character. Like I know them well enough. I'm inside their heads and I can feel them, and that works for me. If I get to the point where I'm like, why did they just lie? Then I will stop it and I will have them tell the truth and then see where that takes me instead. And then see if I can sort of misdirect somewhere down the line. Again, it goes back to my point about not liking red herrings. I just don't like anything where you're artificially putting up barriers.
So what about, okay, so you don't like red herrings, and I totally understand that. Like, for me, I think it's more interesting to, if you're going to implement a red herring, it has to be done in a very meaningful way, but also subtle in the sense of like how it misdirects the reader, and having it tie in to the main story is even better, I think. But red herring, I think, is just so generalized in its tropiness that writers often fumble in terms of how they incorporate them. But another thing that you incorporate in particular is sort of like, I guess I would frame it as like a ticking clock
Oh yeah.
sort of tool that you use. Because in The Last Murder at the End of the World, it's like you have, 107 hours is when shit's gonna go wrong on the island. Evelyn Hardcastle has 8 days. Even The Devil in the Dark Water, I think it's more like the ticking clock is like, when this voyage is going to end? This fucking nightmare of a voyage. Like, when is it going to end and get to where we need to go, kind of thing. But those are narrative tools that you've used really well. And in a locked room mystery in particular, it's something that I feel is able to be utilized in order to control pacing and tension, which are two really, really important things in a locked room mystery. And, you brought up Agatha Christie earlier, like slasher pacing. It's like something that you don't really think about, but when it's done really well, it completely changes the flow of the story. And so for you, how do you approach managing the pacing while you're plotting, drafting, editing, all that kind of stuff, but also thinking about tools like the ticking clock that you can use to control the tension, as well as what the reader knows and when they're introduced to it?
It's really interesting with the thing with tension. I did that because it's a thriller trick, right? Like all thrillers do this. All thrillers basically put the characters on a countdown. Even if the countdown is like you've got the serial killer sends a no and says you've got 3 days until I strike again. There's usually some sort of countdown mechanic in a thriller. I ripped it wholesale from thrillers because when I came up with Seven Deaths, I wanted to do an Agatha Christie novel, but Agatha Christie, I loved them, but they were they're about 50,000 words. The tension and the pace comes from the fact that they're short, nothing else. It's a sort of like, it's what the readers bring into it, because the reader, typically in those novels, especially in the old days, could feel it, the pages in the hands. So you'd read it and know that you were halfway through. So you'd have the tension of being like, I'm quite near the end now. And then you get 3/4 and you're like, oh, I'm so near the end. I'm racing to get to the last page. What that eventually becomes with Agatha Christie is that you only care about the final 2 pages of the novel. Her canon, and she increasingly leans into it. And again, as somebody who's a structure geek, I ripped apart all those novels to see this, and you see it happening. She realizes that her readers only care about the solution to the problem. It's the only thing they give a shit about. So the only thing she starts to give a shit about is that big monologue at the end, those 3 pages at the end, and making sure that's satisfying and making sure that wraps everything up. The writing before it generally goes quite to shit because she doesn't care. The sort of like the archetypes who she's talking about, they go to shit. Like she doesn't really care about. And I love Agatha Christie. What I'm saying, she was the first, I think, truly professional novelist in that way. She worked out what her audience wanted. She worked out how to deliver it quickly. She wrote 2 to 3 books a year. What did she have to discard to do that? And she discarded a lot of characterization, a lot of exposition, a lot of scene setting, because she wanted to get you to the final 3 pages. So she created tension by knowing where you were at the book. That was all it was, knowing that halfway you should think this and 3/4 you would have the page in your hand. I couldn't do that because I knew my novel was going to be about 130,000 words. Like, I can't depend on you getting 20,000 words into my novel and being like, well, yeah, this is, I'm still invested in this big house. I needed something, because I knew also that, like, at 10,000 words, I explained that you do body swapping in that novel. At sort of 20 to 25,000 words, I introduced the big threat of the novel, which is the footman. Like, these things come slowly, they're paced out. So I needed other methods to keep you engaged, even when the clues weren't coming as rapid-firedly as they would come. So I went to thrillers, looked at what thrillers did, and I ripped off their counting clock mechanic. Straightforward. Like, I just took it and I put it in. And now it's the starting point in my planning. Every time I'm planning a novel, I think about what the countdown clock is. I think about what is energizing, because otherwise, in a locked room, there's generally, they don't need to move particularly quickly. Like, it generally doesn't matter. The person's already dead. Like, they were killed in a really convoluted way. It's very unlikely that the murder is going to set up an incredibly convoluted room for a second victim, right? Like, it's probably not going to happen. So
a convoluted serial killer,
like Saw, but like in 50,000 words. Like,
right.
yeah, exactly. So you don't have that sort of. It's one of those things where in a thriller you generally have the inbuilt tension of what it is, that people know it's a thriller, they know it's going to move quickly, they bring that to it. With a locked room, they don't actually have to bring that to it, so you have to invent it. So I took it from thrillers. It's always a countdown clock. it's always short chapters. I always write very short chapters. I never go above about 2,000 words. I mean, that's like, I generally would try and keep to 1,000, 1,200 per chapter. Very, very short. And I love a cliffhanger. Like, these are boring, bog standard, obvious things, but they get more important the more pages you are writing. And they get more important when you are laying, I do a lot of world building in my books. And because, as I said earlier, if you're going to do a locked room, I really want to set up, right, why that locked room murder had to happen. That generally goes to a lot of characterization. It goes to a lot of scene setting, like what the house looks like, what this island looks like, where everything is. It takes me about 10,000, 12,000 words to do that. So I need those shorter chapters. I need that ticking clock. I need that tension that comes through. Oh, fuck, big reveal. Oh, fuck, another big reveal. Oh, fuck, there's another big reveal. Because you're not paying attention to the murder. You're paying attention to all these other things, right?
Right,
So, yeah, I think that's roughly it. Very simple, very basic thriller writing techniques.
In order to avoid the oh fuck as a writer, which means something's not working, as opposed to the oh fuck as a reader, which is like you hope is well timed.
Something is absolutely working. Yeah.
It's absolutely working.
You're right. I've never thought about that before, but that's like a perfect piece of symmetry, isn't it? Probably at the moments when I've said, oh fuck, that's not working, and then messed around with it, the reader said, oh fuck, because suddenly it is working because I spent a year working around with it. That's
exactly.
Nice. I'm taking that with me next time I have my oh fuck moment.
We can frame it as like something more like academic, like the oh fuck dichotomy or something like that.
Yeah,
because everything in academia has curse words.
Exactly. If it's an SFF Addicts academic paper, it does.
There you go. We get a PhD in SFF addiction.
Oh my god.
Oh gosh. Yeah, well, I one last, another, kind of wrapping up, I want to talk to you about keeping things fresh, because we talked about Agatha Christie, we've talked about the locked room mystery, the different variations on the theme. This is a subgenre that's been around for a while. Your stories are so fresh though. They're so like, I remember my mind being blown when I'm reading Evelyn Hardcastle. Like I immediately texted like 15 people and was like, hi, I have a book you need to read. Like, this is so good. And I do, to kind of return to something you'd said in part 1 of our chat, where you need to be comfortable with kind of not really knowing what's going on, but it's on purpose. I do tell everyone that when I recommend it. I'm like, hi, you need to read this. You're going to have no idea what's happening, but you're going to love it. And it's going to be so good. Because it is important to go in with that mindset of like, okay, I didn't miss something. It's okay that I have to trust the author, which we do. We trust in Stu that he will tell us what we need to know.
That's his second piece of merch. Trust in Stu.
Yeah.
Stu, yeah.
Trust in Stu, but don't believe a word he says, and don't ask him for advice. It will be wrong.
That's the next dichotomy.
Oh my god!
But what is your approach to keeping things fresh and interesting and original without betraying the hallmarks of the genre? How do you make sure you're keeping that Christmas tree steady and arranging the baubles so we can still see the tree, if that makes sense?
This is going to be one of those cop-out answers, but it's because I know the genre really well, and I know what's tropes really well. And what I'm always trying to do as I write is I'm trying to second guess what the reader's thinking, because I've been that reader, right? I read them all. So it's a dance. It's always a dance. I write a thing and then I stop. And especially when I have a big reveal, I'll stop and be like, what was the reader thinking was going to happen here? What are they at in this story? And I assume every reader's the smartest version of themselves. I assume that they know this genre inside and out, because a lot of them do. A lot of them read crime, especially compulsively, and sci-fi and fantasy. I bet it's exactly the same. They know what to expect. They know at this point in a novel usually where the detective up to and what will happen. They know that at this point in the novel, all the craft writing books tell you there should be a setback, right? They've read it 1,000 times. And I'm trying to think about what you expect, then I'm trying to go somewhere else. I'm trying to subvert it. I'm trying to go around it. I'm trying not to deliver it, but maybe deliver something else that you thought was coming much further down the line. There's a moment in, and again, I talk about Seven Deaths a lot because I think it's a book that more people have read than Devil, but also I think it's a book that's older, so I'm more comfortable spoiling things in it. But there's a moment in that novel where one of my characters is working out how to tell Evelyn that she's going to be murdered that night. And it's on his mind all day, and he's really worried about her. And it took me ages because I wanted, how do you do that speech without her collapsing, and another character would then have to see that and blah, blah, blah. And I worked out that when she walks in the room, she's like, oh yeah, I know I'm going to be murdered tonight. Don't worry about it. And it blows the entire book up. Like, it's exactly the opposite to what you were expecting. And every time I write those sorts of moments now, my head goes back to that moment in that book for how it felt to me as a writer when I came up with it, and how it felt to me thinking about what the reader would think about it, right? Like, genuinely having that little moment of being like, oh my God, they're going to love this. They are going to go nuts, because suddenly everything past that moment crumbles. Everything they thought was coming crumbles. There is no safe ground anymore. Like, all those tropes have been thrown into chaos. So to answer your question from earlier, it is that sense of dancing with the reader, trying to understand what they think is going to happen, and deliver at least 50% of it so they feel on solid ground with the tropes, if not the content of the story. But then just to surprise you, like, I know what you think is going to happen, so let's go a different direction. Or eventually you think this is going to happen, so it will happen, but it's not going to take you where you think it's going to go. It doesn't lead to the outcome that you've been trained by all these crime novels to expect. And when I get that, and when I start thinking that's working, that's when I know the book's working. It's the same with the things we said earlier about characters. There's certain little gut feelings to me where I'm like, when those things start coming easily to me in my writing, when I'm there at 2:00 in the morning writing and it's going, these subversions are just happening organically. Like, I'm just doing them. I'm not having to think about them. I have to go back to my planning. That's when I know the book's going well. That's when I know it's going to be something that I'm going to enjoy reading. Or not, to judge by my 50% of 1-star reviews. Like, they may not, but, I enjoyed writing them. So there's always
the
that.
right readers will enjoy it.
Fuck the haters.
The Marmite lovers.
No, don't fuck the haters. The haters are the best. Like, the 1-star review, and this is completely off topic, but the 1-star review is the greatest thing. The 1-star review is demented. It always insane.
That's true.
Because, like, in this day and age, right, with like professionally bound covers and copy editors, and sort of like, if you hand someone a book, it will have probably a beautiful cover on it that somebody's worked on, and it will be professionally bound, and it won't feel like razor blades in your hand. That's worth 2 stars. That alone, it doesn't matter about the content. That is 2 stars. If somebody gives you a 1-star review, they fucking hate you. They don't hate the book, they hate you so much. And the review will nearly always be about you and how, like, clever you think you are, or how silly your beard. It's brilliant. I love them so much. Anyway, sorry, that's completely off topic.
Yeah, no, well, and I think that a 1-star review can help sell
the
a
chaos.
book. I've said this so many times, because the 1-star review is going to be someone that vehemently hates something, but that, like,
but someone might read that and be like, I vehemently love this.
Loves that, right? So I was talking to someone the other day that said they'd written a book where they had used footnotes in their book, right? Like little clever footnotes, like, Neil Gaiman-esque. And someone wrote a review about, it was snippy. And I was like, that review would make me want to read the book. So, you're whatever 1 stars you have is just steering
the haters
books towards
provide
the right
room
hands.
for the lovers.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
When people do filters, right, they only ever filter for 5 stars or 1 star. That's all people look at. Nobody ever looks at the 4. That's why I hate 4-star reviews. 4 stars are like, oh, you stingy bastard. Just give me the 5th star. I hate that. And like, the
just
3-star
round up. Round the fuck up.
Yeah. And like, that's it. And the 3-star review is like, I just occupied you for some length of your day. That's what I accomplished. I did nothing more than that. You were not entertained. You were not disparaged. You felt nothing about the time that we spent together. I hate the 3-star review. The 2-star review is just, yes, I think usually you get a 2-star review because the package arrived late or was damaged. The 1-star review is completely demented, and the 5-star review is an ego stroker. So they're the only two you really pay attention to.
Well, Stu, we have indeed enjoyed it. You coming on our podcast has not been a 3-star.
Yes,
it has been.
A 5-star
it's been a fucking. It's been either a 1 or a 5.
We'll let you guess which.
Oh my god!
Now, moment to moment, it can be either. I acknowledge that about myself. And moment to moment, I'm a 1 or 5-star guy. It just,
oh my god. No, but it has been an absolute pleasure, and that's it for this mini masterclass on Locked Room Mysteries with Stu Turton. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If you can let folks know where they can find you online.
Yes, I am at Stuart Turton on Twitter or X. I am the same thing, I think, on Instagram, but who the hell knows? I'm around, and if you go onto my page, it'll just be me relentlessly trying to sell you my book with jokes. So hopefully the jokes make up for the sheer amount of marketing, but please go and look and you may laugh.
Amazing. And go get Stu's books. Fantastic work. Go get his merch. Trust in Stu. There's merch that doesn't exist, but I hope it exists after.
Right. We're manifesting
us creating it here. We're manifesting that shit.
I'm going straight away to design them up. It's happening.
You can also follow SFF Addicts on Twitter, Threads, Instagram, all that at SFF Addicts Pod. You can find me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can get Mushroom Blues in paperback, hardcover, and ebook if you want some fungal goodness. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me across all the main socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, wherever else, at MJ Kuhn Books, or just go to mjkuhn.com. All my links are there.
And go buy MJ's books.
Yes.
And support the TFF, the Thorn Food Fund.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts. And there's Thor just to close us out.
Creepy boy.